Wonderful, Srikanth. I am very happy to be having this conversation with you. And I'm looking forward to the next 30 minutes where we're going to exchange some thoughts around, coaching, I think transformation, agile. I see a lot of words that come up when I look at your profile. So let's get started. And I want to thank you for, giving us this opportunity for this conversation as well, Shri.
Absolutely. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And let's get started by knowing a little bit about yourself, Shri. What do you do right now and how's that connecting to your passion?
Absolutely. So I am a CEO coach. I coach CEOs and senior teams of mid-market companies. There's companies that anywhere from $10 to $100 million in revenue. I work with clients in US, in Canada, in India, Australia, and the UK. So I have a global customer base, and I absolutely love what I do. All my clients are looking to grow their businesses and accelerate growth, and that is what I'm helping them with, right? So we will get into a little bit more about the Agile Growth System and so forth, but that's my offering to my clients, and I absolutely love what I'm doing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Shri. This is good. But when I look at your profile, Shri, it tells me that you started off, your education seems to be around civil engineering, and then there's been a lot of work-related roles around sales and finance, and now it's all about CEO coaching and transforming businesses. So how do you connect the dots across all of them, Shri?
Yeah, it's a great question. People used to sometimes look at my resume and like, I can't make any sense of it. You seem to have been all over the place. So let me just give you a little bit of background. Like all good Indian kids, I went into engineering, right? So growing up, the message at home was, hey, smart kids going to engineering or medicine, what are you going to do?
Correct.
I was like, I don't think I can get into medicine, so let me go into engineering. So, I did my bachelor's in engineering in India, and then I went to the US to get my master's in engineering.
Okay.
I was focused on civil engineering with a focus on transportation.
Wow.
But right after I finished my master's, I kind of switched fields and I got into IT. And I worked as a corporate trainer for a little while, and then as a programmer. And then I went into working for a software product company in professional services and then in sales, right? And then I went back to school to get my MBA, and I joined a leadership program at GE, where I rotated through different businesses in sales, marketing, and business development.
Okay.
So I spent some time in GE Aviation in Cincinnati, GE Energy in Northern Nevada, GE Aviation in India, and GE Capital, and so forth. And I had an amazing experience.
Wonderful.
And in 2009, I moved from GE to corporate executive board, which was basically advising CFOs and other CXOs of very large companies in India, as well as multinationals. I did research for them. I was an executive advisor. I did business development, and then I went back to CEB in the US. I worked in corporate strategy for a little while, and then I went to and worked at Capital One in a finance role.
Correct.
Right? So I have the benefit of having worked in a lot of different industries, in a lot of different roles. But in a way, it has been a journey of me going from somebody who was looking for social cues from family and friends and society and organizations and what I should be doing,
Correct.
to actually learning to listen to myself in terms of what do I want to do.
Correct.
So a key inflection point was around 2014. We were living in the US and we were getting ready to move to Thailand, to Bangkok for my wife's career. My wife's an American diplomat. And as I thought about what do I want to do, I kept coming back to this idea of I want to help people achieve their potential.
Correct.
Around that time, I'd had a couple of coaches, and I'd heard about this coaching program at Georgetown University focused on leadership coaching.
Wow.
So I signed up for that program. And so we moved to Bangkok in August of 2014. And starting in September, I started flying back from Asia to the US every month to do the program in the US. So it's a 7-month program. It was an absolutely transformational program for me, right? I learned about leadership coaching, but I also learned a lot about myself. And so along that journey, what happened was I realized that I want to be in a role where I'm serving others,
Correct.
helping them grow and develop.
True.
And so my offerings have also evolved around that time. Okay. So I started with, leadership coaching and executive coaching. I added training to that, then I added facilitation to that. And I was working with larger companies. And in the last few years, I've made a pivot to focus more on the mid-market space.
Correct.
where I get to coach the CEO and the senior team. Whereas earlier, even if I was coaching a senior vice president at a big bank where you have 40,000 people, 80,000 people, I
Correct.
wasn't feeling like I was having systemic impact.
Correct.
Whereas in the setting that I have right now, it's really meaningful and very well aligned with my talents and strengths and interests. So I'm able to bring my strengths as a coach, able to bring my business acumen, having worked in a lot of different functions, and combine them together into
Correct.
business coaching. And it's been great.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I can understand, because where you can actually see, as you rightly said, the systemic impact, right? And it's really not possible when it's a large, global organization. At this point in time, there are some huge giants, and you might be impacting something, but it's so difficult to capture it systemically. So great, Shri, wonderful to see that. I think you're aligning your passion with your profession, right? And that's a great combination to get. Wonderful.
Absolutely. I sometimes, teach this concept of ikigai, right? Wherein they talk about these 4 circles coming together.
Correct.
What do you love doing? What are you really good at? What does the world need? And what can you get paid for? When those 4 circles intersect, that's like sweet spot is like your ikigai. And that's kind of like what has been the journey for me to kind of identify that, discover that rather, and kind of then deploy myself in that area. And that's been great.
Wonderful, wonderful, excellent, Shri. I mean, now that you do a lot of things around coaching, be it leadership, business, they say that the end of it all types of coaching is primarily a life coaching. What are your views there, Shri?
So that's an interesting point, right? I think there's multiple layers to coaching. Sometimes, coaching can be in helping people build certain skills and abilities. But sometimes the work that you're doing is deeper, more transformational, right? Which kind of gets down to people's identity, as in, what are some of the boundaries that they've drawn for themselves, and what a society drawn for themselves, and what they can do and cannot do, and what they believe the world will accept and not accept.
Correct.
And sometimes your growth and development comes from really kind of pushing those boundaries and redefining them, and drawing perhaps different boundaries, or being able to transcend those boundaries. And that requires you to kind of tap into your own internal experiences, understand what are some of the key assumptions that you hold about yourself, and being willing to challenge all of your beliefs and assumptions, which is a pathway to kind of growth if you think about it.
Correct. True.
One of the frameworks that I love a lot is this idea of the hero's journey. So, this is something that Joseph Campbell, who is a very famous anthropologist, researcher, and so forth, he's famous. One of his most famous books is The Man with a Thousand Faces.
Yes.
Right. So Joseph Campbell went and studied mythology across the world. Right. And what he found was, regardless of where he went, whether it is in India, whether it's in, Native Americans in the US and different parts of the world, there were some very common themes that played out in all these different cultures, right? And you see this sometimes in movies, right? Wherein the hero's journey comes something like this, right? You have the hero who is facing some kind of a challenge, wherever they are, they end up leaving the village or their home or, wherever they're at, and they go out into, the wide world, which seems scary and dangerous. And out there, they kind of face their demons and they slay the dragons, and they kind of come back at the end of the hero's journey back to the place where they started, but they're able to see the same place with new eyes, right? And if you think about the journey that we take with leaders, it's kind of similar, right? They might be operating with a certain set of beliefs that this is what works. I should never do these types of things. This will give me results. I got to stay away from this. And as they go back and test those assumptions, try out new behaviors, experiment, they can come back with greater abilities to the same situation, but they have more choices available to them.
Correct.
And so in a way, we are kind of their guides, or their companions on this hero's journey, if you think.
Wonderful, wonderful. Very nice, Shri. Now, you coach a lot of CEOs, and at this point, you said a lot of mid-sized organizations, but I'm sure you started with larger organizations to achieve their growth aspirations. So what has changed in the last 2 years in how these kinds of transformations and growth journeys are getting addressed?
Sure. So, maybe about maybe 5, 6 years ago, I heard this term VUCA for the first time. Maybe it was 7 years ago, right? This whole idea that the world has very high levels of volatility. So VUCA is VUCA, volatility, very high levels of uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Correct.
Right? And because I was delivering work around the world, right? I was doing work in Asia, Australia, Africa, North America, and so forth. One of the common themes that I used to hear is that the pace of change is really high. It's like unprecedented. And what has happened in the last couple of years is nobody questions the VUCA world any longer. Everybody's kind of accepted that we absolutely are living in a VUCA world, right? So if you just think about the pandemic, how it came out of nowhere and disrupted the whole world, right? It wasn't just isolated. The entire world was affected by it. And how did people respond? How did companies respond? Those forces are in play. And then on the other hand, you see that there's some, if you look at the financial markets, some companies are appreciating dramatically. A $1 trillion valuation was unheard of a few years ago. And now there's several companies in that space. But also the volatility has gone up, right? You think about it, Facebook a few months ago had a market cap of over $1 trillion.
Correct.
And then on one day, 2 weeks ago, on February 3rd, the stock dipped quite drastically and they lost $250 billion in market cap.
Correct.
And now Facebook's market cap is less than $600 billion, right? So they've lost about $450 billion in market cap. And so talk about volatility. It's just like up and down, and that can be quite a roller coaster if you think about it. Correct. On the other hand, you have so much innovation happening, and you see all these unicorns being born, right? So unicorn being defined as any company with $1 billion valuation or more. Correct. And I recently read an article which basically said that at this point there's more than 1,000 unicorns. And so now they're saying, do we need a different term, not just $1 billion valuation, maybe a decacorn or something like $10 billion valuation. You have a new unicorn being born every single day. Just in January of 2022, you had 42 new unicorns, coming into existence. So there is a tremendous amount of growth that is happening. There's a tremendous amount of disruption that is happening. There's a lot of innovation that's happening, but it might be in pockets. And so if you look at what has happened to large companies and their longevity, right? One way to measure that is how long do companies stay on the S&P 500, Correct. Right? If you go back 20, 25 years ago, they would have a average tenure of about 60 years or so. Yes. Now it's like dramatically shrunk. And so, companies are facing a lot of threats, not just from traditional competitors who might be similar sized large companies, Correct. But a lot of upstarts who are coming in from nowhere and redefining entire industries. You Correct. Think about the Uberization or the Airbnbs and so on and so forth, where they're really kind of understanding the customer value chain and Correct. Coming and saying, I'm going to take this one piece and yes. do it so much better than anybody else that the others become irrelevant. And Correct. So companies have realized that they have to be able to respond more effectively. Mm-hmm. What that means is the old leadership models may no longer be effective. Correct. Right? So in the past, a lot of companies relied on a top-down command and control leadership model. Correct. Right? It gave them tremendous results for decades or centuries. Correct. But they're realizing that that is no longer going to scale, especially in an agile world. Correct. And so they have to, operate differently. Right? It's not just about having a bunch of really smart people in the ivory towers. They have to learn how to empower the entire organization and bring out the ideas from all around, kind of more of a bottoms-up approach. And that is, I think, driving a lot of innovation and growth and so forth in most companies.
Wonderful, wonderful. And this brings me to find out, you used the word agile, right? And I think I wanted to understand, what is this agile growth system that you're talking about, Shri, and how is it different from the other models?
Absolutely. So when I talk about agile, I'm not talking about agile from like how it's used in the IT world. Okay. Right? Yes. I'm talking about agile as in being more adaptable, being more flexible, being more nimble, being more responsive to the challenges that we face in the world. True. Right? So I think of agility from, you can have communication agility wherein you're able to kind of have more flexibility in terms of how you communicate. You can have strategic agility in terms of how you think. You can have emotional agility in terms of being able to regulate your emotions and not get hooked. You can have there's various forms of agility. Just like think about leadership agility. You don't use a one size fits all approach, but you might say situational leadership is a form of leadership agility, right? I'm going to assess the situation, and based on what is required, I'm going to use a different leadership style. So that is what I mean when I think about agile. And my business is all about accelerating growth, right, and supporting organizations who are trying to achieve that. So Agile Growth Partners was kind of born from that area, right? I want to be able to partner with companies to help them be more agile and grow faster, right? So that's how my company was born, Agile Growth Partners. Mm-hmm. And so I have two core offerings, right? One is the Next Level CEO, which is basically one-on-one coaching for CEOs to expand their leadership capacity and capability so that they can have greater impact. Correct. The second offering is Agile Growth System, which is coaching for the CEO and the senior leadership team, so they can achieve improved business results, right? So I use this framework called the 5 drivers of agile growth. So I focus on strategy, execution, culture, talent, and cash flow, right? So if you think about any organization, if they want to really grow and scale and build an enduring business, they have to get all 5 of these things right.
Correct.
And so I've been able to kind of create an offering that is holistic and comprehensive, and involves the CEO and the senior leadership team in being able to make progress in all of these areas.
Correct.
So, the way my offerings would work is I would have one-on-one coaching for the CEO. It's usually a year-long engagement, and companies choosing to extend, which is what has been happening. And I would do one-on-one coaching for the CEO throughout the engagement, but I would also get together with the CEO and the senior leadership team multiple times, right? We begin with like a 2-day annual engagement process, and then we do a half-day, business review sessions, monthly business review sessions, day-long quarterly planning sessions. And in these sessions, we are able to kind of tap into the collective wisdom of the team.
Correct.
Give them some new exercises, some new frameworks, some new models, and also help them create improved behaviors that get better results.
Correct. So that's like a combination of 1:1 and teaming, right? At team coaching, that's what is really going to be something like into the future, right? So it can't be isolated 1:1, but it's a combination of both. It looks like that, Shri.
Absolutely. So there's individual coaching for the CEO, there's team coaching for the senior leadership team. I also use a system called the Metronome Growth System, which is created by Shannon Susko out of Whistler, Canada, which is basically the software that allows you to run your business much more effectively, because it becomes a behavioral accountability system, right? So all your metrics, all your action items, all your priorities, everything is loaded there. So that becomes your one source of truth that everybody then uses in everything that they do. So when this combination of a great leadership team with a really good framework, a holistic model, a really good coach, and a system comes together, that can work like magic and lead to transformational results.
Beautiful. I'm so happy for you, Shri. And it's interesting. You brought it up when you said when you're at the gym and you don't have a partner, an accountability partner. Sometimes you can tend to give up, right? And so that brings me to this kind of work that you do around accountability. So there's a lot of things around developing people and teams, right? And what's the best way for managers to practice empathy and accountability?
Sure. So when I think about accountability, I feel like, it's about ownership. It's about somebody who can explain what is going on, right? It's somebody about who can also kind of look around the corners, and they can be an early warning system, right? All of those things have to come in when you're accountable for something.
Yes.
Right. And in order to kind of create this culture of accountability, you have to get a few things right. Some people say it's just about having the right type of, compensation structure, incentives, and that's all you need to do. And then people will, deliver what you need. But if that were true, if you think about sports teams that hire the most expensive players would be winning all the championships. But that's not what actually happens, right?
True.
And so, I talk about 5 things that you have to get right when it comes to creating culture of accountability. The first one is you need intention clarity.
Yes.
So you need to be able to kind of communicate and articulate and sometimes co-create the intention exactly where you're trying to get to. Correct. The second one is you need role clarity, right? You got to make sure you have the right people in the right seats doing the right things. So being able to assess, is there a good fit between the person and the role is really important. The third thing is you need process clarity, right? Sometimes you might have people with the best intentions, but if the process is unclear, they're going to end up spinning their wheels, right? The fourth piece is about creating a feedback-rich culture.
Correct.
Right? The only way we can grow is if we can get regular feedback on what are we doing well and where could we get better, right? So for companies to kind of master that is going to be really crucial. And the fifth piece I say is about communication norms.
Correct.
So much of what we do is done through our, oral and written communication, whether it be, through email, text, whatever, right? Correct. And being able to learn how to make clear requests and clear agreements is a key to having accountability. When these 5 things come together, you will have a culture of accountability. I don't necessarily see empathy and accountability as being mutually exclusive.
Correct.
Right? I think they kind of go hand in hand. For you to create accountability, you have to be empathetic.
Correct.
Right? Some people define empathy as being able to walk in somebody else's shoes.
Correct.
Right? Another definition that I've heard is of compassion, which is empathy combined with action.
Correct.
Right? Empathy might just be, imagine there's, they talk about this tale from the Buddha where he says, there was somebody in the Himalayas and they were being crushed by a rock. Mm-hmm. Now somebody walks by and they say, oh my God, I can imagine how painful it must be to be crushed by a rock. And his point is now you have 2 people crushed by a rock. What you in fact need is compassion, when you say, hey, this person is crushed by a rock. Let me move the rock out of the way so that we can free up that person. Okay. Right? So when you bring in compassion and you really relate to the people at a deep level and understand what is going on for them, you have to recognize that people want to be successful. People want to give their best, right? They want to have the greatest impact. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to do a mediocre job, right? Everybody wants to do their best. And so being able to kind of remove the obstacles, right? Remove the rocks that are holding them in place and freeing them on to do better work, I think is the key. So when you bring in your intention to have empathy and compassion, and you work on these 5 things that I mentioned, intention clarity, role clarity, process clarity, feedback-rich culture, and communication norms, you can definitely create a great culture of accountability, which will really kind of catapult your company's results.
I mean, and what you said is absolutely right. You get this combination of all these 5 things, and then, and accountability doesn't function without empathy at the foundation. But there are some people who are overdoing on some of them. Either they're overly keeping people accountable, and then there is this empathy is lacking. And there are some people who are always out there trying to showcase empathy, and then they're not able to get the execution component, and they're all, struggling. So what would you suggest in such a case, Shri?
Absolutely. Fantastic point. And what you've described is the core struggle that a lot of people are grappling with, right? Because if you think about one axis, right? One end of the axis is all about relationship. And the other one is all about task, right? So you have some people who are task oriented, who are all about, tell me what the project deliverables are, what the outcomes are, let's get things done. That's what I'm focused on. And then you have some people who are very much focused on the relationship side, who are focused on how does this person feel? What is the morale like? So the task versus relationship is an interesting dimension.
Correct.
And if people can find that sweet spot where they can do both, that requires relational agility, if you think about it, right? Being able to focus on the task and on the person is the key.
Correct.
Right? You have a lot of leaders who have produced tremendous results in their careers, but there is a lot of collateral damage.
Correct.
There's huge body count as they've kind of gone on to do what they wanted to do, right?
Correct.
Which doesn't scale.
Correct.
And they begin to kind of hit those, those ceilings, and they realize that unless they can fix their relational skills,
correct,
they're not going to be very successful.
Correct.
Or they're doing it in a way that is burning out their people.
Correct.
And so when you have people who are overweighted on the task side, they have to learn how to kind of balance it out on the relationship side. And then when you have people who are overly focused on the relationship side, you find that their results are suffering and they have to learn how to get tasks done. And that is the core balance that, that they have to find. And a lot of the coaching that I do is around that stuff, right? So many business owners and CEOs that I work with have accomplished great things. They've built great companies, but they've been more focused on the task.
Correct.
And one of the things that I help them understand is that your number one job is to take care and develop your people. So I usually use the book, The Motive by Patrick Lencioni, where
Yes.
he draws a distinction between two leadership styles, right? There's one which is a reward-based leadership style. So I come into a leadership position because I feel like I'm entitled to leadership because of all the things. It's a reward for all the work that I've done.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
The other leadership style is more about servant-based leadership style, right?
Correct.
So when you're a servant leader, you recognize that you're there to be of service to the teams that you're leading.
Correct.
Right? It's your job to make them successful. When they succeed, you succeed. Versus the reward-centered leadership style is, I am here to be successful and all these people are here to serve me, right? So Steve Jobs,
Correct.
right? If you think about his first innings, if you want to think about at Apple, he was what you'd call Steve Jobs 1.0, which was all about, I'm the leader with 1,000 helpers.
Correct.
These people exist to help me. But when he came around, he realized that he had to operate differently, and he built a fantastic team.
True.
And if you think about, Apple, which is worth $3 trillion or more now, most of the value was created after his passing, because he was able to build a phenomenal team, which has continued to deliver even after he's gone.
Correct.
Right. And it's basically that maturing that needs to happen in leaders, wherein they understand that unless you have really strong relational style and you can deliver results, you can have great impact.
Correct. Well, very well said, Shri. This also brings me that today organizations have a lot of things around multi-generational workforce, right? And there's a lot of things happening there, and issues also that they face when the kinds of how they get things done across these different generations, and teamwork being one of the biggest competitive advantage that organizations can really capitalize on. So what are you seeing as the missing links in this equation of getting this multi-generational workforce working together and becoming and delivering like high performing teams? What's missing there, Shri?
I think at the core, there is a lack of appreciation for the value that the other generation brings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If we just resort to name calling, right? You millennials, you baby boomers, or whatever, right? In a way, we are being very judgmental and not being very curious.
Correct.
Right? Because we've kind of written off that generation to say this generation is like this and they're not, no good, or this generation is like this and they're no good, which in a way, such organizations are depriving themselves of amazing latent talent that exists, but that needs to be harnessed and leveraged a little bit differently.
Correct.
And so again, that agility of being able to say there's a lot that can be gained by some of the older generations and some of the younger generations, how we kind of bring that all together is the key, right? So if you think about diversity, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. Historically, diversity has been more focused on gender and race and so on and so forth. But I think one of the most important pieces of diversity is being able to manage diversity of thought.
Correct.
Right? Recognizing that different people have different points of view, and how do we harness and leverage all that stuff versus only focusing on one and shutting out the other. Correct. And I think it's the same kind of stuff when it comes to the multi-generational dynamics.
Correct.
Right? So when the baby boomers, if you want to think about it, can get more curious about the millennials, and instead of just saying, I used to do it this way, they don't do it this way, so it's not going to work. And vice versa, when the millennials can think about like, hey, what can we learn from the baby boomers, and how can we, incorporate those things? Then interesting things begin to happen. But that requires you to kind of be a little bit more vulnerable, be a little bit more curious, and experiment and take some more risks. That's what I think needs to happen more.
Wonderful. I mean, and you're right. And I think you said about the beliefs, right? It's the beliefs between the two generations and the lenses through which. And that brings me to find out, talk about this unconscious biases that we all deal with. How have you seen it in teams when you're transforming, Shri? There are these teams that you transform, or the leadership team and the CEO trying to, but there could be these biases that teams have. And how has that come in the way of, getting to that larger objective or becoming that best team to perform, or the high performing teams? What's really happening there with biases? What is your observation, Shri?
Yeah, absolutely. I think biases are all at play, and usually they're unconscious, they're invisible. So one of the first steps that we need to take is make the invisible visible, right? Create the opportunities where these biases can come to surface and we can just look at them, right? Without judging them too harshly, with a compassionate view of like, what is it that you believe? or what is that you might be believing and operating with that could be questionable? It's not whether it's always right or wrong, but is there some gray area there? Right. So the first step is about surfacing that stuff. And then if people can take perspective on that, they can say, we have been operating with these implicit norms based on certain biases. Let's try out something different and have some new explicit norms, which might give us better outcomes. And then experiment with that, play with that, and see what happens. I think that first step of creating the space, the psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson talks about, where we can at least surface those things and talk about it, I think is the key.
True.
Right. And all of that requires, enormous amount of trust, right? Vulnerability-based trust that needs to exist. And so teams have to really work on those things. They're not just going to happen by magic. And, sometimes they might be dismissive to say that's a soft stuff. But I feel like unless you do both of those things, you're not going to get the hard results that you're going for.
True. Shri, do you find any difference between, sales teams when you work with the sales and business teams to working with the larger people and other functional teams? Do you see any, that there is a difference in the way these teams collaborate and achieve results?
So I think there is a difference, and while some of the stuff is just based on how sales teams can be compensated, wherein there can be a significant commission, a bonus, a variable pay structure for achieving short-term results.
Right.
They have to keep delivering quarter after quarter, for you to kind of hit your targets. Right. Whereas some other functions might be operating on a slightly longer time zone, right. And they may not be compensated in a similar fashion.
Correct.
And so that, I think, inherently creates some tension in terms of how they collaborate.
Correct.
Right. And in most organizations, historically, there's tension between certain functions, right? There might be tension between, for instance, engineering and sales, right? Or finance and sales and so on and so forth. And in some cases, even between between marketing and sales.
Correct.
And I think what is necessary is for each function to really understand how dependent they are on all the other functions working effectively.
Correct.
Right? Because once they have the recognition and the acknowledgement, they can then learn how to leverage them more effectively while giving them credit and helping them be successful.
True.
And which then leads to kind of creating win-win situations and improved collaboration.
Correct. True, Shri. And this also tells me to say, when we're talking about the different types of teams, I mean, it also brings me to the point of women in sales, right? Especially, and there is a saying that women could be actually better sales professionals than men, but there are many in number in sales. So what is your observations or your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've obviously trained, hundreds of sales people around the world. And if I think about it, the proportion of men and women isn't equal, right? There is definitely, as I've been thinking about it, there's been more men in my classes than women.
Correct.
But I also have been part of an organization, CEB, Corporate Executive Board, where there were many, many women in very senior roles.
Correct.
And it might have been actually more women than men, and they produced fantastic results. And sometimes when I, thought about it, somebody said that maybe, because some of the leaders were able to bring in the women early on in the organization, empower them, they were given permission to bring in more women. Not excluding men, but like they were able to, the whole environment was conducive to more women coming and working.
Wow.
Whereas in a lot of other organizations, if it's primarily men, there are biases that kick in. Definitely. Right? And they may not be as open to women leaders, women sales professionals, as well as women sales leaders. And that can kind of handicap those teams. And in a way, I think it's a disservice to the team, because they are, passing on a really, really talented, group of people who can produce great results for you.
True.
And so I think there is a bit of an imbalance. I think it has corrected a little bit. It has gotten better, but there's still more work to be done.
True. And I should say thank you very much, Shri. This has been, I would say, we had some good insights about great literature, magazines, articles, I think books, a lot of stuff that you covered, and then also spoke a lot about good models that we can use to think and to build a growth mindset and also to transform and be agile, right? So thank you so much for giving this entire breadth of your experience to us in this last 45 minutes. I should say thank you very much.
Thank you, Priya. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love the range of the questions. And like you said, we covered a lot of ground. It's such a privilege to be here with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you, Shri. And we look forward to staying in touch with you.